Oh, I'm not symmetrical. Must be symmetrical. There we go. I'm still not symmetrical. That's okay. Hi everyone, Kate here. Welcome to 2019. This is going to be my first video, I think, that I will post in the new year, and I'm starting it off right with a Q&A. I love Q&A videos. I think my favorite part about making videos is interacting with you guys, and I feel like a Q&A is a little bit more of a dialogue rather than me just sitting here and talking into camera. I've tried filming get ready with me. I've tried filming get ready with me's before, and I don't think I've ever actually posted one. But a Q&A feels a little bit more like I'm genuinely talking to you guys rather than a Q&A where I'm like, I'm talking to you guys, but like I'm not really. I'm just sitting alone in my room and talking to a camera. That's what I'm doing right now. But at least I have some dialogue from you guys. And yes, I have a printed list. Everybody else just does it off their phone. Let me show you my phone. This is quite literally my phone. But yeah, this is a 1940s rotary dial telephone, and it is the only phone that I have. Old school. Okay, Miss B of Flying vs. Farm asked, what drew you to do historically based videos as you do? The thing that drew me to videos initially was actually watching Lisa Fremont Street. What's her actual name? Ashley? Is it Ashley? For years I thought her name was Lisa, and I know it's not Lisa, but besides the point. She still makes, and has been making for many, many years, absolutely fantastic vintage videos. And at the beginning, there really weren't that many vintage beauty people. She was it. She was the main one who produced videos on a regular basis and of superb quality and content. I loved watching her videos. The only thing was, it depended on her hair length. Is sometimes she had a lot shorter hair. Usually she had a lot shorter hair. Like mine's down to my waist at the moment. Doesn't look that long, but it's like way down here at the moment. And I couldn't always do the styles that she replicated, and there really wasn't anybody doing long hairstyles for 1920s looks. And I kind of felt there was a gap there, and I was doing a lot of research, and I was trying to find authentic styles for long hair, not just modern people trying to make their hair look 1920s, but I wanted the real deal. Like, I knew women in the 20s must have, they can't all have had short hair, some of them must have had long hair, and they did. And I was determined on finding out, well, what did they do with their hair? How did they style it? And since I was doing all this research anyway, and I was really inspired by her channel, I decided to make videos of my own. So I started in, I don't know how many years ago that was, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, making videos. I was initially doing vintage styles for long hair, specifically 1920s styles, which is where my YouTube name came from. I've thought about changing it recently because I don't know how accurate a description it is, but I still like it. It's, you know, it's not too bad, but that's where the name came from originally, is that's all I was really doing. I was doing long hairstyles, mostly for the 1920s and 30s. Moving on from that, the way I do videos now, I was doing silent films for a long time. I only recently got the equipment to do talkies, and I have a speech impediment. Or I had a speech impediment. It's not what it was when I was younger. But I get nervous talking on camera. I don't like the sound of my own voice. So for a long time I did silent films, partly because I liked the silent film aesthetic, and partly because I was uncomfortable using my voice on camera. Now I just don't care. I've been insulted by people on the internet for, you know, my face, my weight, everything. So the voice thing doesn't bother me. It's, you know, people are going to find problems anyway. A lot of the videos I do at the moment are more beauty recipes, or I'm going to try to get more into historical topics, like rather than just doing a makeup look or something, going a little bit more in depth into some of the background and the history of some of these everyday beauty items, routines, that kind of thing. But really the transition from just doing hair to doing a more wide range of things, because like I said at the beginning, it was just hair, sometimes makeup, but usually just hair. Really the transition came when I started having thyroid issues. And basically my hair thinned out. I never had bald patches or anything, but it was not what it was. And I still have shorter pieces. You can't tell at the moment because I have my hair up. But my hair has never fully recovered. And while I do still do long hairstyles, I don't have as thick a hair as I once did. So I find certain styles are more difficult. But that's okay. It's grown out a bit. I've sort of gotten my thyroid under control. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I'm not on medication for it or anything. I made some lifestyle changes which seem to have lessened it's an autoimmune problem, but the lifestyle changes seem to have lessened it enough that I don't have to be on medication, which is good because I had a bad reaction to the thyroid medication. I'm not getting into that at the moment. That's not pretty. So anyway, that was the reason for the diversification of topics. I'm still very much interested in what's sometimes called domestic history. It's the history of everyday women and their everyday routines and that sort of thing. I like beauty and grooming routines or history and that kind of thing, because that is something that women in history were doing every day, that we're still doing every day. It's often talked about as being trivial, but it's a big part of our lives. And I think getting an understanding of the past, that really comes from understanding a person's everyday life, not necessarily just the major events of history. I took a history class in university that was focused on these are the dates of things that happened, and here were battles, and here are how many people died. And it was an interwar one. It went from about World War I to World War II and all the decades in between. And there was almost no focus on like normal, everyday people, with the exception of them being a number in terms of how many people died in certain battles. And that's not really what interests me. I don't want to know. I mean, it helps to have some of the background history, but my interest is not in major historical events. It's in real people's everyday lives. Because if I think of my life, I don't define my life by major political or, big stories on the news. They certainly do affect my life to a certain amount, but that is not my everyday life. And I don't think that is an accurate view of history. I think it's the everyday things that are genuinely more important to people's lives. At least on a daily basis. Okay, that was kind of a long response. I'll try to keep this. Yeah, I just talked for 12 minutes on the first question and I got a whole page, so I'll try to be a little quicker. Okay, Carol asked me. Okay, she's asked me a couple questions here that I'm going to kind of lump together just because I've been talking for ages. She asked me if I enjoy watching those 100 years of beauty videos and if I think they're accurate. And she also asked, do you think people are accurate when they make videos talking about the 20s, makeup and hair-wise? Some people make good videos about the 20s. Some of the 100-year videos are accurate. Quite a few are not. I have a hard time. I actually don't seek out 1920s beauty tutorials unless they're done by a person in sort of the vintage community who I know will do a good job with them. There is a lot of bad 1920s advice out there in terms of how to get the look, and I think it's a combination of misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation about the 20s, I think more so than any other decade. People don't really look at the original sources, or when they do look at it, they think, oh, really dark lipstick, that's what they wore in the 1920s. I'm like, not really. A lot of times it was bright red, but because the black and white film, the way in which it captures colors, it makes a bright red look like dark, almost black. So some people are accurate. I don't want to name names in terms of the people who aren't, but I prefer not to watch them anymore because I cringe a lot at the historical inaccuracy and it hurts. So Carol asked, I think it's really difficult to make a hairstyle of the 1920s. It is impossible to do on my hair. Do you think there was anything that helped women back then achieve the ideal do? Yes. It's the short answer. There were certain techniques and tools that were available to women back then that are not available to women now. I am going to make a whole video about it. Some of them are right behind me. And I will do a shelf tour. People, I keep getting asked about shelf tours. I will show you what's on my shelves. That sounds dirty. I will show you what's back here at some point. Okay, Ashley asked, what advice do you have for those who want to start wearing vintage pieces, as well as your overall experience using historical hair and skincare? Okay, she doesn't specifically mention by vintage pieces she means clothing or like accessories. I think with accessories it's fairly easy to transition into, as long as you don't mind looking slightly ridiculous on occasion. If you have no shame like me, then it's really not a problem. It's a matter of whether or not you're confident enough to wear the pieces or whether or not you feel comfortable in them. And if you don't feel comfortable in them, maybe start with something that's a little less bold and wear something a little more subtle to begin with and then transition into it. But if we're talking about clothing, that's a whole other matter. I used to wear vintage clothing, not every day, but pretty close. I'm now at a point where I wear vintage inspired clothes, a lot of which I've made myself or made from historical patterns. I tend to wear those more often than true vintage pieces. I do wear vintage pieces. I do have a number of vintage dresses and things. I think the most important thing is get used to hand washing and learn how to mend. If you're not good at clothing repair, I would not recommend wearing vintage clothing. You're going to pop a seam or two, you're going to lose buttons, you're going to get little holes, there are things that are going to be, like, things you're going to have to fix. And it's going to happen quite regularly. Yeah, that's my number one thing, is if you are not a skilled seamstress and you don't know much about mending, learn. In terms of overall historical hair and skincare, I love historical hair and skincare. I do it on a daily basis. I'm not always aiming for a historically accurate look, but I do use historical products almost every day. I don't make everything I use in terms of my beauty products and skincare, but I make like maybe 95%. I buy toothpaste, I buy shampoo and conditioner, and I have a few like lipsticks and blushes from the old days that I'm using up. Everything else I make. My favorite thing about vintage products is they tend to be a lot simpler, they tend to be very natural, and I think the historical view of makeup, I'm not a minimalist. I mean, I don't think you'd look at my shelves behind me and think, oh yeah, that girl's a minimalist, but I certainly admire a lot of the thought processes behind minimalism, the choice to not overconsume, the choice to use things and use them up rather than having tons of products. Declutters make me uncomfortable. I don't think you should buy stuff and then just throw it out. Like, when I buy something or make something, I tend to do it with a mind to actually use it. I think it's, I don't know. I have a hard time, and I can understand the rationale behind it and why people, it makes them, happier when they've decluttered. But to me, it seems like often it's a vicious cycle where you declutter and then you just buy more stuff. So vintage skincare and makeup routines tend to be a lot simpler. They do not use all these products that beauty gurus nowadays tell you need. And I really like that about it. It makes my routine a lot simpler, even when I'm getting like gussied up. And I've definitely taken on some of those thrifty, use it, don't throw it out attitudes that earlier women did have. It was a matter of necessity. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to be a minimalist because I'm being trendy. It was, we have no money and we have to eat, so I'm not going to buy like 40 lipsticks. And I greatly admire that tendency towards thrift and making smart decisions. And that's definitely influenced what I bring into my beauty collection. The more natural and simpler ingredient lists agree with my skin and general health better than a lot of this modern stuff. I don't know if that really answered the question. Okay, so Madison asked, who living or dead would you wish to meet? That's a hard one. Because you're counting, like, everybody. I think if we're talking living, let's start with living people, because that's a little easier, because it's limited. Whereas if it's dead, then it's, like, all of history. I think first on my dream dinner party list would be Jane Goodall. I greatly admire Jane Goodall, and anytime I've heard or listened to like a talk she's given, I'm just blown away by her uh, compassion and her intelligence and her way of viewing the world. So I would love to meet Jane Goodall. Also on my list is Ruth Goodman, as in the Ruth Goodman that hosted Victorian Farm and Edwardian Farm and all the farm programs. She did Victorian Pharmacy. She's done some other BBC programs. She wrote, I have it right behind me, the How to Be a Victorian book. I love her. Every time I see her on TV, her genuine passion and enthusiasm is absolutely contagious. I think she would be so much fun. And the last on my living people list, so this is dinner for four, including me, the last person on my list would be Caitlin Doughty, who, if you don't know who that is, she is the host of the YouTube channel Ask Mortician. She's written a couple books. She is a member, I think she's a founding member of the Order of the Good Death. She talks a lot about death positivity. If you don't know who she is and you've not heard of the death positive movement, you're probably very confused right now, but I highly recommend you go check her out. She does a lot of historical videos as well. She did a really great video about Victorian death photography. I get really, I don't know if angry is the right word, but irritated in all these photos where somebody's maybe has a slightly glassy-eyed stare, or they're just like not looking perfectly normal in a photograph, and it's just a bad photo, but somebody's like, Victorian death photography, and it's obviously not, and you see it all over the internet. And she has a really great video of disproving some of the myths around Victorian death photography. I don't think I am capable of putting into words exactly how fantastic she is and what she's really all about, so I'm gonna link her channel below, so if you want to go check her out, she's down there. Highly recommend her. Hello, any other deathlings? And on my dead list, I think my ideal tea party would be Mary Pickford and Mabel Normand. Yeah, I would love to have them both over for tea and just sit and chat. You might be expecting that I would want to meet Buster Keaton. I don't think I would. You know when they always say don't meet your heroes? I think it would probably spoil the magic. I love him so much, and I don't want any reality to tarnish that love. The only other person that I might want to add to that list would be Ada Lovelace. She was a brilliant mathematician from the Victorian period. She was the daughter of Shelley? Is it Shelley? Byron? Give me a second, I'll check. It was some famous poet. She's in here somewhere. Yeah, Lord Byron. She was Lord Byron's daughter. And I don't know if it said when she's definitely sort of a Victorian in terms of at her height. She is sometimes credited with being the first programmer. There was a mathematical technique. She didn't come up with the mathematical machine. I'm forgetting what they called it. It's some sort of calculation machine. She didn't come up with the machine, but she certainly saw its potential in a way that its creator did not. She was able to extrapolate basically a machine very similar to our normal computer, or our modern computer, and had the vision to be able to see what the technology could become. And I think she would be an absolutely fascinating person to talk to. I do have a degree in mathematics, so I had to put a mathematician on the list, and I think Ada Lovelace would have been an interesting person to meet. Okay, another question from Madison. What are some of your favorite movies? Oh, hello there. Editor Kate here. I was editing my recent Q&A video when I realized, this is going to be way too long. As such, I've decided to put the movie-specific questions in a separate video, so if you would like to find out my favorite silent movies, regular movies, and just some recent favorites, you can see them there. I will have, if not posted already, will be posting it within the next few days. So please feel free to check it out there. And now back to our regular scheduled video. Okay, I got a couple questions about where I'm from. Traveling with Rick asked if I was from the UK, and Sela, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, asked if I was from the Midwest or Canadian, and mentioned that I have a slight accent. I'm Canadian. I live in the GTA at the moment. I'm hoping to move out of the GTA at some point and into the countryside, but I do live sort of in a suburban area. I live in an old house. I live in an old suburban kind of area. But yes, I'm Canadian. Part of my accent, though, I feel I need to mention, is actually the remnants of a speech impediment. I don't want to be like, all Canadians sound like me, because I think part of my accent is actually just the remnants of what was, when I was younger, a fairly intense speech impediment. I had a strong lisp. I'm better now, but it does sometimes come out a bit. Oh, Carol asked me quite a few questions. She also asked, except the 20s, what is your favorite era? I don't think I have a specific, like, runner-up. I think my favorite era is actually probably the Edwardian era at the moment. It kind of shifts around depending on what I'm into. The early 20s is definitely a favorite, but at the moment I'm really feeling the Edwardian period. Cats and Ferns asked, what about the 1920s do you love the most and the least? In terms of love the most, I'd probably say silent films. I really, really do love silent films, and early talkies as well. I find them absolutely captivating and fascinating, and especially the early ones. The early ones, not the really, really early ones, those are almost like the pre-1920 ones that were almost more like a stage play than a movie, but in the late teens, early 20s, you get more realism. They're shot outside a lot of times rather than on a very, very fake-looking set, but you're kind of seeing the world as it really was to a certain extent, like visually, not necessarily a reflection of the movies. They're fantasy a fair bit, but you're really seeing the past, and I find that quite fascinating. And there's something really exciting, especially like with Buster Keaton's early films. There's something very experimental about that time. Things weren't set in stone. There wasn't the same industry that there would later be. There was a lot more independence, and I think that's very interesting. I don't care for movies anymore. I find them very commercial. Most modern movies, but before that, kind of the artistry that was involved in early films, I quite admire and enjoy watching. In terms of what I love least about the 1920s, I think it's kind of the usual stuff for people who have an interest in the past. It's some of the social issues, the sexism, the racism, anything where people are not being treated as equal. I do quite strongly believe that, a person's a person. You really shouldn't judge them or treat them differently based on a superficial reason. I think people need to be nicer to one another and treat each other with more respect than even nowadays they do, but certainly back in the 1920s there was, though interestingly, I find 1920s films a lot less sexist than like 1950s films. I have a real hard time with a lot of 1950s movies. Some are okay, there's certainly exceptions to that, but there's a lot more misogyny in later films than there are in early films. There are a lot of strong women in early cinema, and you definitely see that reflected. That is probably the thing I like the least, is just the treatment of certain people as less than, when, like, no. Really? No. Okay, and the last question on the list was also from Carol. She asked if I like musicals. And the answer is yes. I love a musical. I love fluffy things. Preferably 1930s musicals. I really like the Fred and Ginger films and some of the Busby Berkeley musicals. I find that more, it appeals to my aesthetics more than like the 1950s musicals. And I really do like some of the 1950s musicals. But as I mentioned before, there does tend to be a little more misogyny in later films than there are in early films, which is really surprising. I think a lot of people think like things have just slowly been getting better for women over the years, and they have to a certain extent, but I think after World War II, after women were out of the home and, you know, proving that they could do jobs men could do, there was definitely a push to get them back in the homes and, like, you know, out of those jobs. And I find that a lot in 50s cinema. So, yes, I love musicals, but I tend to prefer the 1930s ones, both for aesthetic reasons and sometimes for plot. No, like I said, that's not a hard and fast rule. There's certainly 50s musicals that I like, but yeah, give me Fred and Ginger any day. Well, I've been talking so long, I'm starting to lose my voice. I will try to edit this down. It's been like, it's been over an hour, so for all our sakes, I'll try to make it shorter. Well, thank you for watching, and I thank you for watching all my videos, not just specifically this one. It really does mean a lot to me that there's 5,000 of you now, or over 5,000. That's kind of what this Q&A was in honor of. And I really do appreciate you guys. I love the dialogue. I love talking to you guys in the comments. And I find, you know, a lot of the questions you ask to be really inspiring. And this Q&A itself has inspired at least 2, if not 3, upcoming videos that I'm going to film. So thank you. Really, thank you. Well, I guess I'll end it here before I blab on any longer. Thank you again for watching. Please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!